The buses arrived at dawn like predators in the mist, their engines rumbling through the quiet suburban street as federal agents in tactical gear spilled onto the sidewalk. Children's screams pierced the morning air as uniformed officers dragged families from their beds, separating parents from children, siblings from siblings, tearing apart lives with mechanical precision. Social media exploded with shaky cell phone videos, hashtags trending within minutes as the nation watched in horror. Save. The children became, "What have we done?" as the truth began to surface. 3 weeks earlier, the Harmony House had been a sanctuary. Marcus Rodriguez wheeled his chair across the polished hardwood floors, checking on the breakfast preparations in the spacious kitchen where the aroma of fresh pancakes and coffee filled the air. His prosthetic leg, a reminder of his third tour in Afghanistan, caught the morning sunlight streaming through the bay windows. The charity home he'd founded with his fellow veterans housed 23 foster children, ranging from toddlers to teenagers, all of whom had found stability in this converted Victorian mansion. "Morning, Marcus," called Sarah Chen, her voice bright despite the early hour. She maneuvered her wheelchair effortlessly around the kitchen island, her left arm missing from an IED explosion in Iraq. "The twins are already asking about soccer practice. I think we've created monsters." Marcus chuckled, pouring coffee into his favorite mug, one decorated with handprints from children who'd moved on to permanent homes. "Good monsters, the kind that believe in second chances." He gestured toward the living room where 8-year-old Maria was helping 5-year-old Tommy tie his shoes, both of them chattering in rapid Spanish and English. "Look at them. Sarah. This is what we fought for." The third member of their partnership, James Washington, emerged from the office carrying a stack of paperwork. His service dog, Ranger, stayed close to his side, trained to detect the early signs of PTSD episodes that still haunted James 15 years after his discharge. "State inspection report came back clean," he announced, setting the documents on the counter. "Full marks across the board. The caseworkers can't stop praising our educational programs." The 3 veterans had pooled their disability benefits, life savings, and an inheritance from Marcus's grandmother to purchase the property. They'd spent 2 years renovating it, learning plumbing and electrical work through online tutorials, painting every room themselves, and creating individual spaces where traumatized children could heal. The home operated under strict oversight from Child Protective Services, with regular inspections, background checks, and mandatory training sessions. Across the street, behind lace curtains and bitter resentment, Linda Morrison watched the morning routine with growing irritation. The 62-year-old retired bank manager had lived in the neighborhood for 34 years, watching property values climb steadily until those people moved in. The noise, the traffic, the different kinds of children playing in her previously pristine suburb, all of it offended her sense of order. Linda had complained to the city council 17 times in 3 years. Noise violations, parking disputes, concerns about property values, each complaint meticulously documented and filed. But the veterans ran their operation by the book, and every complaint was dismissed. The children were well behaved, the property immaculate, and the community impact overwhelmingly positive. Local schools reported improved test scores as the veterans tutored not just their own children, but neighborhood kids as well. "It's not natural," Linda muttered to her reflection in the hallway mirror, adjusting her pearls with sharp, precise movements. All those children from different places, different backgrounds. Something's not right about it. She'd started calling them Karen among her friend group, though she'd never admit the irony of the nickname sticking to her own behavior. The morning that changed everything started like any other. Marcus was reviewing homework with Elena, a brilliant 14-year-old who'd been with them for 2 years after aging out of multiple foster families. She was teaching herself coding, her laptop covered in stickers from various programming languages and tech companies. "I got accepted to the summer coding camp at the university," Elena announced, her eyes bright with excitement. "Full scholarship. They said my portfolio was exceptional for someone my age." "That's incredible, mija," Marcus beamed, using the Spanish endearment he'd picked up from the children. "Your birth parents would be so proud." Elena's smile faltered slightly. Her parents had been deported when she was 12, leaving her in the custody of an aunt who'd abandoned her 6 months later. "Do you think they'll ever come back?" "I think," Marcus said carefully, "that you're building a future that will make them proud no matter where they are. And you'll always have us." Across the street, Linda Morrison made her phone call. Her voice shook with manufactured urgency as she spoke to the 911 dispatcher. "I need to report human trafficking. There's a house on my street, 247 Maple Avenue. They're keeping children there, lots of them, different ages, different races. It's not natural. I've seen men coming and going at all hours. Cash transactions. I think they're selling these kids." The dispatcher's training kicked in immediately. "Ma'am, can you provide more specific details about what you've observed?" Linda had rehearsed this moment for weeks, crafting a narrative that would trigger immediate action. Late-night visits from unmarked vans, children being moved in and out at strange hours. The men who run it, they're disabled, using it as a cover. One of the children tried to run away last month, but they caught her and brought her back. She was crying, begging not to go inside. None of it was true. The unmarked vans were the county school transportation for special needs children. The late-night visits were Marcus picking up Elena from her weekend job at the library. The child who ran away was actually Tommy, who'd chased his ball into Linda's yard and been terrified when she'd screamed at him for trespassing. "Ma'am, we're dispatching units immediately. Please stay on the line and do not approach the property." Within minutes, the call had escalated through multiple agencies. Human trafficking involving children triggered automatic federal involvement. ICE, FBI, local police, and Child Protective Services all received alerts. The bureaucratic machine that was designed to protect children began grinding into motion, powered by Linda's lies and sustained by assumptions about those people who didn't belong in her neighborhood. Marcus was helping Tommy with his shoelaces when the first police car pulled up, then another, then an unmarked van, then a bus. The tactical teams surrounded the house before anyone inside realized what was happening. The battering ram hit the front door at exactly 6:47 a.m., splintering the wood that Marcus had lovingly restored with his own hands. "Everybody down, hands, where we can see them." The commands echoed through the house as armed agents flooded through every entrance. Children screamed, diving under tables, clinging to each other as strangers in tactical gear shouted orders in English that some of them barely understood. "Wait! Wait!" Marcus shouted, his hands raised, his wheelchair knocked sideways in the chaos. "We're licensed. We have all our paperwork. These are foster children. Sir, step away from the children immediately." An ICE agent pressed him against the wall while another agent zip-tied his hands behind his back. Marcus felt his prosthetic leg twisted painfully as they searched him for weapons that didn't exist. Sarah tried to comfort Maria, who was sobbing in rapid Spanish, when an agent grabbed the child and physically separated them. "She doesn't understand," Sarah pleaded. "She's scared. Let me translate. Ma'am, step back. We'll handle this." The agent's tone brooked no argument as Maria was carried outside, her small fists beating against the stranger's tactical vest, calling for Sarah in a voice that would haunt everyone present for years to come. James emerged from his office with Ranger beside him, his hands raised, his voice steady despite the chaos. "We're veterans. This is a licensed foster home. All our documentation is in the filing cabinet. Please, Just look at our permits. But the machine was already in motion, following protocols designed for criminal enterprises, not licensed charities. The children were separated by age and gender, loaded onto different buses, taken to different facilities. Elena clutched her laptop as they pulled her away from Marcus, her eyes wide with terror that mirrored the trauma that had first brought her to their door. "This is a mistake!" she screamed in perfect English, her coding dreams crashing around her as she was processed like a criminal. "Call our caseworker. Call Ms. Peterson. She knows us." The news vans arrived within an hour, alerted by scanner traffic and Linda Morrison's anonymous tip to local media. The footage was devastating, children crying as they were separated from the only stable home they'd known. Disabled veterans treated like criminals. A house that had been a sanctuary, transformed into a crime scene by yellow tape and federal agents. Linda watched from her window, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth as she observed the destruction of everything Marcus, Sarah, and James had built. She'd told her friends it would happen eventually. People like that always had secrets. The neighborhood would be better now, quieter, more appropriate for people who belonged. The impact rippled outward like shockwaves from an explosion. Other licensed foster homes across the state received surprise inspections as authorities questioned whether the trafficking operation was part of a larger network. Donations to veteran charities plummeted as donors feared association with the scandal. Foster children already in the system faced increased scrutiny and delays in placement as caseworkers scrambled to verify the legitimacy of their caregivers. Marcus, Sarah, and James were held in separate federal facilities, denied contact with each other or the children they'd raised. Their military records, their disability ratings, their spotless background checks. None of it mattered in the face of trafficking allegations. The system that had failed to protect them overseas was failing them again at home. This time triggered by the malicious lies of a neighbor who saw their differences as threats. "I want my lawyer," Marcus repeated for the 15th time during his interrogation. The fluorescent lights in the windowless room seemed designed to break down suspects, but Marcus had survived worse in military prisons overseas. "I want to know where my children are. I want to know if they're safe. Mr. Rodriguez, you're facing federal charges for human trafficking, conspiracy, and child endangerment. The children you were holding are safe now. If you cooperate with our investigation, we can discuss reducing the charges." "Holding?" Marcus's voice cracked with exhaustion and disbelief. "We were raising them. We were giving them homes after everyone else gave up on them. Elena was going to coding camp. Tommy was learning to read. Maria was painting again after months of nightmares." The federal investigator, Agent Patricia Kim, had worked trafficking cases for 8 years. She'd seen the worst of humanity, rescued children from genuinely horrific situations, and learned to trust her instincts about predators and victims. But something about this case felt wrong from the beginning. The house was too clean, too organized, too filled with evidence of love and care. The children's rooms contained artwork on the walls, personal belongings arranged with obvious affection, educational materials that suggested long-term investment in their futures. Agent Kim, her partner, called from the evidence room. "You need to see this." He held up financial records that told a story of sacrifice rather than profit. 3 veterans pooling their disability payments, taking out legitimate loans, documenting every expense with receipts and bank statements. There were no cash transactions, no unexplained income, no evidence of the criminal enterprise that trafficking operations required. "Run the tip again," Agent Kim ordered. "Full trace on the original 911 call. Something doesn't add up." The children, scattered across emergency placements throughout the state, were struggling to adapt to their sudden displacement. Elena, placed in a group home for teenage girls. refused to speak to her new caseworker. Tommy wet his bed for the first time in 2 years. Maria had stopped eating, sitting silently in the corner of her temporary foster home, drawing pictures of the house on Maple Street and the 3 adults who'd taught her to trust again. Child psychologist Dr. Amanda Foster was called in to evaluate the children's mental state and assess whether they'd been victims of abuse. Her interviews painted a picture that contradicted every assumption about trafficking operations. The children spoke of homework help, birthday parties, family movie nights, and adults who'd attended their school plays and soccer games. They asked when they could go home, not understanding why they'd been taken from the only stability they'd known. "Elena, can you tell me about your time at the house on Maple Street?" Dr. Foster asked gently, her recording device placed conspicuously on the table between them. "Marcus taught me Spanish," Elena said quietly, her eyes fixed on her hands. "I was losing my parents' language, and he said it was important to remember where I came from. Sarah helped me with my college applications. James taught me to code. They said I was smart enough for MIT if I wanted it." "Did anyone ever hurt you there? Touch you inappropriately? Make you do things you didn't want to do?" Elena looked up sharply, her eyes flashing with anger. "They're good people. They saved us. Why won't anyone listen? Why won't anyone believe us?" Dr. Foster's report was unambiguous. The children showed no signs of abuse, neglect, or trafficking. Instead, they exhibited symptoms of trauma from their sudden removal from a stable environment and separation from trusted caregivers. She recommended immediate reunification, pending investigation resolution. Agent Kim received the phone trace results on a Tuesday that would change everything. The 911 call that had triggered the federal response came from Linda Morrison's landline at 247 Maple Street, directly across from the foster home. But more damning was the security footage from a nearby business that captured Linda in her car, practicing her story into her cell phone, rehearsing the timing and details she would later report to authorities. She planned this, Agent Kim told her supervisor, laying out the evidence like pieces of a puzzle that finally made sense. False report, fabricated evidence, deliberate targeting of a licensed facility. This isn't a trafficking case, it's a hate crime. The second twist came when investigators interviewed other neighbors on Maple Street. The picture that emerged was of Linda Morrison's increasing obsession with the foster home, her complaints to city council, her late-night surveillance of the property. Several neighbors reported her use of racial slurs when discussing the children and their caregivers. One remembered her explicit statement that she would find a way to get rid of them. The arrest warrant was issued on a Friday. Linda Morrison was taken into custody while watering her prize-winning roses. The same flowers she'd complained were being damaged by noise from the children next door. The charges were severe: filing false reports, conspiracy to deprive civil rights, domestic terrorism, and federal hate crimes. The possible sentence up to 20 years in federal prison. The story exploded across national media as the truth emerged. Justice for Harmony House trended worldwide as people shared the story of 3 disabled veterans whose service to traumatized children had been destroyed by one woman's racist lies. Congressional representatives called for investigations into how federal agencies had acted on uncorroborated reports. Legal experts discussed the dangerous precedent of treating licensed facilities like criminal enterprises without evidence. The protests began in Washington, D.C., but spread to every major city as veterans organizations, civil rights groups, and child advocacy organizations demanded accountability. Veterans carried signs reading, "We served our country, not our neighbors' prejudices." Foster children who'd aged out of the system shared their stories of the heroes who'd given them hope. Senator Maria Gonzalez called emergency hearings on family separation policies and the federal response to trafficking reports. She'd served in the military herself before entering politics. and the sight of disabled veterans being treated like criminals had triggered her own memories of discrimination and injustice. Agent Kim, in your professional opinion, could this traumatic separation of children from their licensed caregivers have been prevented? Senator Gonzalez asked during the televised hearings. Yes, Senator. Standard protocol requires verification of licensing status and consultation with state child services before federal action. These protocols were bypassed due to the urgent nature of the report. But in hindsight, 30 minutes of verification would have prevented months of trauma for 23 children. And what was your assessment of the children's condition when they were removed from Harmony House? Agent Kim's voice carried the weight of professional regret. They were healthy, well-educated, and deeply bonded to their caregivers. The separation trauma we inflicted was far more damaging than anything they'd experienced in that home. Marcus, Sarah, and James were released after 6 weeks in federal custody. Their charges dropped with full apologies from the Department of Justice. But the damage to Harmony House was extensive. The building had been stripped bare during the evidence search. Windows broken, gardens trampled. The careful touches that had made it a home destroyed by investigators looking for crimes that had never occurred. The reunion with their children took place in a sterile government building, supervised by caseworkers and recorded for legal purposes. But nothing could contain the raw emotion as families were brought back together. Elena ran to Marcus, sobbing apologies for not being able to stop what happened. Tommy climbed into Sarah's lap and refused to let go. Maria handed James a drawing she'd made of their family 26 figures, holding hands in front of the house on Maple Street. "We're going home," Marcus whispered, his voice breaking as he held Elena and Tommy simultaneously. "We're all going home together." The legal proceedings against Linda Morrison became a landmark case in federal hate crime prosecution. The evidence was overwhelming: recorded surveillance footage of her practicing her false report, documented complaints expressing racial bias, testimony from neighbors about her escalating obsession with removing the foster home from her neighborhood. Her defense attorney tried to argue that she genuinely believed she was protecting children, but the prosecution's case was airtight. "Your Honor," Prosecutor Janet Williams addressed the court during sentencing. The defendant didn't just file a false report. She weaponized federal law enforcement against disabled veterans and traumatized children because their presence in her neighborhood offended her personal prejudices. The psychological damage to these children, who'd already survived abandonment and abuse, is immeasurable. Linda Morrison received the maximum sentence, 18 years in federal prison, full restitution for damages to Harmony House and the veterans' legal expenses, and a permanent injunction preventing her from contacting the family or returning to the neighborhood upon release. The judge's statement was unequivocal. Using false reports to target minority families and disabled veterans represents the worst of American prejudice. This court will not tolerate the abuse of law enforcement to pursue personal vendettas. The restoration of Harmony House became a community effort that drew volunteers from across the state. Veterans organizations donated materials and labor. Local businesses provided services at cost. Neighbors who'd remained silent during Linda Morrison's campaign of harassment now volunteered their time to repair the damage their silence had allowed. Elena's coding camp had held her spot throughout the ordeal, and she arrived with a determination forged by injustice and refined by support. Her first project was a website documenting the experiences of foster children and the families who'd taken them in. "People need to see us as human beings," she explained to reporters, "not statistics or threats or problems to be solved. We're just kids who needed families, and we found them." The congressional hearings resulted in the Foster Family Protection Act, requiring additional verification steps before federal agencies could act on reports involving licensed child care facilities. Senator Gonzalez worked with Marcus, Sarah, and James, to draft provisions protecting disabled caregivers from discrimination and ensuring that military service was considered a positive factor in foster care evaluations. We served our country overseas, Marcus testified before the final committee vote. But our real service began when we came home and realized there were children here who needed us just as much as anyone we'd tried to help abroad. Foster care isn't charity, it's citizenship. It's taking responsibility for the most vulnerable members of our community. The trauma counseling program established for the Harmony House children became a model for supporting families affected by wrongful separations. Dr. Foster worked with the veterans to create therapeutic protocols that addressed both the children's displacement trauma and the adults' feelings of helplessness at being unable to protect their family. Healing isn't about forgetting what happened, Dr. Foster explained during one of their group sessions. It's about understanding that what happened to you wasn't your fault, and that the people who love you will fight to keep you safe. Tommy, now 7, raised his hand with the solemnity of a child who'd learned too early about injustice. Does this mean bad people can't take us away anymore? It means, James answered carefully. Ranger's warm presence beside him, a reminder of his own healing journey. That there are more good people looking out for you now, and that the bad person who tried to hurt our family can't hurt anyone else. The neighborhood around Maple Street transformed in the months following Linda Morrison's conviction. Property values actually increased, as news coverage highlighted the positive impact of the foster home on local schools and community programs. New families moved in specifically because they wanted their children to grow up in a place where diversity was celebrated rather than feared. The house across the street from Harmony House was purchased by the Rodriguez Chen Washington Foundation, the nonprofit established with settlement funds from their wrongful prosecution lawsuit. It became a resource center for foster families, offering tutoring, counseling, and support services. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that Linda Morrison's former home now served the community she'd tried to destroy. 1 year after the raids, Harmony House held its first annual Family Day celebration. Elena demonstrated the mobile app she'd developed for connecting foster children with mentors. Tommy read a story he'd written about superheroes who used wheelchairs. Maria unveiled a mural she'd painted on the garage wall, depicting children of all backgrounds playing together under a bright blue sky. Marcus stood before the assembled crowd of families, neighbors, reporters, and supporters, his voice steady as he spoke about the journey from nightmare to renewal. A year ago, someone tried to destroy our family because she couldn't see past our differences to our shared humanity. She failed, not because we were stronger than her hatred, but because love multiplies when you share it. These children taught us that family isn't about blood or background or ability. It's about showing up every day, believing in each other's potential, and refusing to let anyone tell you that your love isn't valid. We're not just foster parents, we're family, and families protect each other. Sarah wheeled forward to join him, her voice carrying across the crowd as she addressed the reporters and politicians who'd come to witness their triumph. We've learned that democracy isn't just about voting every few years. It's about how we treat our neighbors, how we respond to differences, and whether we choose courage or cowardice when tested. Our neighborhood chose courage, eventually. America chose courage, eventually. But it shouldn't take a crisis for us to remember who we're supposed to be. The celebration continued into the evening, with music and dancing and the sounds of children playing games in the backyard, where Linda Morrison had once stood, plotting their destruction. Elena's coding camp colleagues demonstrated robotics projects. Tommy's soccer team performed a scrimmage. Maria's art class displayed their latest paintings on easels scattered across the front lawn. As twilight settled over Maple Street, James stood in the doorway of the house he'd helped restore with his own hands, watching his family chosen, built, defended, and preserved continue their celebration of survival and growth. Ranger dozed at his feet, secure in the knowledge that his human was safe, surrounded by love, protected by community. The national media coverage had moved on to other stories, but the impact continued to ripple outward. Foster care applications increased across the country as the Harmony House story inspired others to consider opening their homes. Veteran service organizations reported increased interest in childcare and family support programs. Universities added case studies of wrongful prosecution and community healing to their social work and criminal justice curricula. Linda Morrison sat in her federal prison cell, appeals exhausted, parole hearings still years away. She'd lost her house, her savings, her freedom, and her standing in a community that now viewed her as a cautionary tale about the consequences of unchecked prejudice. The neighborhood she'd tried to purify through cruelty had become more diverse, more welcoming, and more prosperous without her presence. Dr. Foster's final report on the Harmony House children, published in the Journal of Child Psychology, documented their remarkable resilience and the factors that contributed to their healing. The stable presence of their caregivers, the community support they'd received, and the sense of justice achieved through Linda Morrison's conviction had all contributed to their ability to process and overcome their trauma. "Children are more resilient than we often assume," she wrote. "But that resilience depends on consistent love, clear communication about events beyond their control, and the knowledge that the adults in their lives will fight to protect them." The Harmony House children survived not just because they were strong, but because they were loved fiercely by people who refused to give up on them. Elena graduated high school as valedictorian. Her acceptance letter to MIT framed on the wall of the house on Maple Street, beside similar achievements from other children who'd found their way to Marcus, Sarah, and James. Her graduation speech, viewed millions of times online, became a rallying cry for foster children everywhere who'd been told they were problems rather than potential. 3 years ago, someone tried to destroy my family because we didn't fit her idea of what a family should look like, Elena told the graduation audience, her voice clear and strong. She saw disabled veterans and foster children and decided we were threats to her comfortable world. But she was wrong about who the real threat was. The threat to America isn't diversity, it's people who try to destroy it. My family taught me that you don't have to be born into greatness. You can choose it every day by how you treat people who are different from you, how you respond when others need help, and whether you build bridges or walls between communities. I choose to build bridges. I choose to remember where I came from and to reach back and help others who are still climbing. The standing ovation lasted 7 minutes, punctuated by tears from audience members who understood they were witnessing the transformation of trauma into triumph, of victimization into victory. Elena's parents, watching via livestream from their home in Mexico, wept with pride for the daughter they'd been forced to leave behind, but who had found her way to a family that treasured her potential. As the celebration wound down and families began heading home, Marcus found himself standing in the quiet kitchen where the nightmare had begun 3 years earlier. The morning sunlight streamed through windows that had been replaced after the federal raid, illuminating a space that had been rebuilt stronger and more beautiful than before. Tommy bounded into the kitchen, his 8-year-old energy undiminished by the long day. "Marcus, are we having pancakes tomorrow? Elena's making them before she leaves for college." "Of course, mijo. We always have pancakes on Sunday." Marcus ruffled Tommy's hair, marveling at the boy's resilience and his ability to find joy in simple traditions. "And Elena will be back for Thanksgiving. College isn't forever." "Will she bring her boyfriend Maria? Says college girls always have boyfriends." Marcus laughed, the sound echoing through a house filled with life and hope and the promise of tomorrow's pancakes. "We'll see, Tommy. We'll see." Outside, the neighborhood settled into evening routines that now seemed remarkably normal for their previous extraordinary circumstances. Children called in from playing in yards, where they were welcomed rather than watched with suspicion. Parents chatted across property lines that no longer served as barriers between different kinds of families. The street that had once been divided by fear and prejudice had become a community bound together by shared experience and mutual support. The story of Harmony House became required reading in social work programs, a case study in both the dangers of unchecked bias and the power of community healing. But for the families living on Maple Street, it wasn't a case study. It was simply Tuesday evening, with homework to be checked, dinner dishes to be washed, and children to be tucked into beds where they felt safe and loved, and certain that tomorrow would bring new possibilities rather than new fears. The house that Linda Morrison had tried to destroy through lies and hatred stood illuminated against the evening sky, its windows glowing with warm light, its doorway open to children who needed families, and adults who understood that love multiplies when shared rather than hoarded. The American dream she'd tried to claim exclusively for people who looked like her had proven bigger, stronger, and more beautiful than her small vision of who deserved safety and belonging. In the end, the buses that had arrived at dawn to tear apart a family had instead awakened a nation to the truth that family isn't defined by law or blood or circumstance, but by the daily choice to love fiercely, protect completely, and never give up on the belief that everyone deserves a home where they belong. The nightmare had ended. The dream continued. One child at a time, one family at a time, one community at a time, proving that love always wins when good people refuse to stay silent.